Matt Walsh, the conservative pundit turned documentary filmmaker, has been on an absolute crusade to tell what he calls the true history of America.
Now, these facts are obviously not flattering for Emmett Till, and for what it's worth, this behavior would not be out of character for the Till family. This is a two-part series about the largest and deadliest con job ever perpetrated against the American population. The civil rights movement and its aftermath, in terms of the number of lives lost and the damage that it's done to our nation, was comparable to the bombing of Hiroshima, and that is not an overstatement. The Rosa Parks story you were taught in school was fake too. This was not just some woman on her way home from work.
But after watching some of these documentaries, I've come to a different conclusion. This isn't the real history. This is a reframing of history. A version of history that shifts the focus away from systemic injustice and into the flaws of its main proponents. My question is, why is he doing this? So instead of spending this video fact-checking every single little thing that Matt Walsh says, like so many channels do, I want to explore the history of racial revisionism in America. How figures like David Duke, the Grand Wizard of the KKK, realized that white supremacy could be changed from a fringe movement into something that was dignified, could wear a suit, and could operate in the political space. And how those ideals evolved and were spread on the internet. In this video, I want to draw a line exactly from the abolishment of slavery right to Matt Walsh, because I believe that he is reframing history in order to absolve white people of any wrongdoing. My name is Dave Blacks, and I can promise you this: some things that you're about to hear were never taught to you in a history class. It's time to give Matt Walsh a taste of his own medicine. This is Removing the Hood, Matt Walsh. So let's start at the end of slavery. The year is 1865. The Civil War has just ended. The Confederacy was defeated. And now millions of enslaved people are now free. For many Americans, this was the beginning of a new chapter. But for others, it was a nightmare. Across the South, former Confederate soldiers gathered in secrecy. They shared stories of war, they mourned the Confederacy, and united against a common fear: the idea that Black Americans may be granted equal rights. And fear is a big part of this, so keep that in mind. And on Christmas Eve in 1865, that fear took on a name. The Ku Klux Klan was born. And in researching this video, I just realized that in that movie, One Battle After Another, which was pretty good, by the way, they called this racist secret organization the Christmas Adventurers. And now I understand why, because that was the day that the Ku Klux Klan was born. Funny. I didn't put that together until I researched this video. Anyway, the Ku Klux Klan was created in direct opposition to Reconstruction and Black political participation. The thought of a Black man voting, holding office, owning land, or exercising the rights granted to them under the Constitution were absolutely unacceptable to its members. And they didn't just target Blacks, they targeted anybody who challenged the racial hierarchy in the Confederate South. Teachers, politicians, religious leaders, business owners, anybody who challenged the status quo was now a target. Under the cover of darkness, Klansmen rode into town with robes, covering their faces with animal masks to hide their identity, but also to spread fear amongst anybody challenging the status quo. They dragged people from their homes, carried out lynchings, they burned schools, they terrorized communities. They were America's first terrorist organization, perfecting the art of using violence and intimidation to achieve political goals. But remember guys, Matt Walsh wants you to think MLK having an affair on his wife and that not being a morally upstanding person is the problem here. In the early 1870s, Congress passed the Enforcement Act. This gave the government authority to prosecute members of the Ku Klux Klan and also deploy federal troops against them. Thousands were arrested and many fled. Others abandoned the movement entirely. For a brief moment, it appeared that the Ku Klux Klan had been defeated. But hate movements rarely disappear. They adapt. And like a bad Hollywood remake in the year 2026, they would return. 50 years later, the Klan found its way back into American life. But this time it wasn't through secret meetings or midnight rides. It was through something different, but just as powerful. In 1915, America's first blockbuster film, The Birth of a Nation, would hit the public and it would become a phenomenon. The movie portrayed Klansmen not as terrorists, but as defenders of the American way, protecting its country from chaos and corruption. And we're still early in the videos, but you can probably see some of the lines starting to form between Matt Walsh. What did he want to do again? What is his intention again when he says that the protests were not always peaceful? He's trying to defend people against corruption, I think, or chaos, right? If we don't call them out, it'll just be chaos, right? That's what Matt Walsh wants you to believe. It's also what the KKK wants you to believe. Who would have thought? To modern audiences, this sounds absolutely absurd because it is. But for many Americans, unfortunately, this was the first ever motion picture that they had ever seen. So it was a cultural phenomenon. I mean, there's even a screening for President Woodrow Wilson in the White House. And now the Klan was reborn. This new version expanded beyond anti-Black racism. They were anti-Black, anti-Catholic, anti-Jew, anti-immigrant, and deeply hostile to anybody outside of the real America. By the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan had turned into a massive political machine and a full-blown business, selling robes, hoods, and memberships to their millions of followers that they had. Politicians courted them, judges and police officers joined them. This aided in the Klan being able to get away with most violent acts. The organization became so embedded in American institutions that their members literally felt untouchable. But remember, guys, because Rosa Parks was actually an activist and she wasn't really tired that day, that's the real problem, and not that America was founded on racism or that it's deeply ingrained in the fabric of our society. It's really that Rosa Parks was an activist. Just remember that. And at the same time, Black Americans now became invigorated with a sense of freedom that they had never had before. They started to build businesses, communities, and wanted to try to establish generational wealth for themselves. And the Ku Klux Klan and other racists couldn't wait to destroy that plan that they had. And to me, this is one of the most important turning points in history, because I want people to understand in 1920, as Black Wall Street's coming to fruition and Black people are starting to want to do their own thing and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, you then have the Tulsa City bombing, the destruction of Black Wall Street. And it's so important to me, this part, because to me, if you have established Black communities with Black-owned businesses, you have less poverty in the inner cities now, in the future. By destroying Black Wall Street, by sending a message to Black people that if they try to do anything or build businesses, that you will come after them and threaten them with violence and, chase them out of town. By doing that, you now put a people in a fearful position. Now, this is where, in 1920, it was very early. My grandpa was born in 1934, and now you have this pervading feeling. Don't try to build businesses. Don't try to do anything that might get you noticed in the public, because it's dangerous. Stay out of, public schools. Stay out of elections. Just get honest work, be a tobacco farmer or whatever you need to do. Keep your head down and don't cause any trouble. You have that mentality polluting the Black race. So now more Black people are less likely to try to build generational wealth, and they're tucking their tails and they're all beginning to go to the inner cities. It took a while for Black people at this point in time to even want to attend school because there were threats of violence and all of that stuff. So when people look at today and they're like, well, why do Black people behave in such a manner? Why are the inner cities so violent and so, pervasive? Part of it can be traced back to this point in time, the 1920s, and this idea that you don't want to do anything because white people will attack you and dismantle you. That mentality is starting to fade in this generation, my generation as a millennial and below. That ideal is starting to fade a little bit, but it's not gone away completely. But when you ask a Ben Shapiro, a Matt Walsh, they look at the surface and they tell you, well, it's because Black people just don't know how to parent their children. They're letting their kids run wild and do whatever they want. The answer is very simple. Do this, parent your kids. and none of this will happen. And while a part of that is true, it's not all true. There is the past affecting the present right now, and we can see that right now. If the Ku Klux Klan doesn't bomb Tulsa and there's more powerful black people, less black people are in the inner cities shooting each other up, it's at this point where history shifts. I can't stress that enough. Let's move on to the next part of the video. This version of the Klan would eventually collapse under the weight of its own corruption. One of its most powerful leaders, D.C. Stevenson, who was the Grand Wizard of the KKK, is it Grand Wizard or Grand Dragon? I think I've been saying Grand Wizard the whole time. Is that not right? I thought it was Wizard because of the pointy hats or something. I don't know. Anyway, it's fucking dorky either way. The Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. Anyway, Stevenson was convicted after abducting and then assaulting a white woman. This would ultimately lead to her death as she tried to swallow a lot of pills in order to put herself out of misery. So you can imagine how horrific the beating and assault that he laid against her was. The trial would expose something that the public had only suspected. The Klan was operating on the fringes, and it had infiltrated politicians, law enforcement, and government. When the scandal broke, Americans got a glimpse behind the curtain, and they were able to see how deep the corruption would go. The membership collapsed, and the Ku Klux Klan was disgraced. Or so it seemed, because like a rash after a night of questionable decisions, the Klan would once again make its return. By the 1950s, America was entering the civil rights movement. The Klan would reemerge in fierce opposition to the civil rights movement. This version was less centralized than the Klan of the 1920s. Instead of one centralized organization, it was just a bunch of little factions of the group acting in their own independent way. What united them was fear. It's always fear. The fear of Black Americans finally receiving the rights under the Constitution that they had always been denied. Unlike the Klan of the 1920s, this Klan was more violent and more reactionary. Cross burnings became a staple in this iteration of the Klan. It was a warning to anybody who was thinking about trying to progress in society and integrate blacks into society that they were next. School bombings, church bombings, these became a staple in the Klan's actions towards people pushing for progress. But remember, Matt Walsh is telling us that the protests becoming more violent than they were intended to be is the real problem here, not anything that the Klan would do. Why would they be in trouble for anything? Why would they have any ownership in anything in this whole situation? It's merely that Black people are just inherently violent. That's what Matt Walsh wants you to believe. So, never mind all the cross burnings, never mind all the bombings, never mind all of that stuff. All that stuff just doesn't exist. It's not important to bring up. We don't need to talk about that because people really, what they're just mad about is they're just mad because Black people couldn't do it in a more peaceful way. These acts of terror were designed to send a message. This is another problem that I have with Matt Walsh's reimagining of the civil rights movement is he fails to mention that local law enforcement and a lot of governmental bodies were looking the other way at the Ku Klux Klan's actions. So in order to, play dirty as they were, Martin Luther King made questionable decisions that he got judged on. The use of school-age kids in protest to march down the streets, to provoke the cops, to, hit them, get the water hoses out. They knew that Bull Connor, this guy, was, particularly rough on kids. And the rest of America wasn't familiar with what the South was dealing with. They were pretty much protected by their own ignorance. So in order to wake America up, they did use kids to protest, to provoke the cops so that they would get their hoses out and they would act a fool like they normally do, because they needed to level the playing field. The law enforcement, people in law enforcement were inside of the KKK. The government was heavily, a lot of the politicians were part of the KKK. This is a way to level the playing field. So Matt Walsh's assessment of why they had to use these tactics is 100% wrong, okay? But I'll talk more about him when I get to his part, and I will light his ass up, believe that. These people are not a threat to America. The KKK was the real threat to America. Through the 1960s to the 1970s, activists, federal investigators, and civil rights organizations worked to snuff out the KKK and dismantle the Klan entirely. By the late 70s to early 80s, the Klan would fracture even more into hundreds of smaller offshoots and groups. This is where you get the skinheads, the Aryan Brotherhoods. Those type of things were created in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was just not organized like it once had been, just a bunch of little gangs, for lack of a better term. But then something interesting happens. Some factions realized that the white robes were bad for public relations. So they tried something new. They tried rebranding themselves. In walks David Duke. Unlike previous Klan members, David Duke understood that image mattered. He was young, well-spoken, and clean-cut. He traded in the robes for a suit and tie. Instead of talking about racial superiority, he talked about white rights. Instead of promoting segregation, he talked about heritage and where you come from. Instead of threatening violence, he went on television and did press conferences. The message wasn't necessarily new, but the packaging was. The packaging was more palatable for modern Americans. It didn't sound like it was gonna hurt anybody. It was just a different point of view. And the packaging worked. Duke won a seat on the Louisiana House of Representatives and would become one of the most recognizable white nationalist symbols that America had ever seen. And this was one of the grand dragons or grand wizards, whatever the fuck they're called, of the Ku Klux Klan. But more importantly, he helped create a blueprint. A blueprint that said you don't need to intimidate, lynch, ride through the streets at night, abduct people from their houses. You can simply get into the political game, and that can influence the public through ideas that sound reasonable on the surface, but point to grievances that are lying just beneath the surface.
His message appeals to many frustrated white voters who believe the civil rights movement has gone too far. He repeatedly tells them they are victims of reverse discrimination and that their taxes are being squandered on welfare mothers.
One reason why the welfare system is out of control is because we have a massive illegitimate welfare birth rate in this country. I mean, they're literally breeding faster than they can raise your taxes to pay for them all.
Political analysts say there are several reasons why Duke won. First of all, he was a better campaigner than his opponent. And second, he was saying what a lot of voters wanted to hear, that whites should have rights as well as minorities.
When Duke left the Klan, he founded the National Association for the Advancement of White People.
It's not a question of being against minorities at all. It's simply a question of making sure that our rights are also protected. That if we're going to have civil rights in America, we must have civil rights for everyone and not a chosen few.
Then in 1981, a turning point arrived. No pun intended. After the lynching of her son, Michael Donald, by a Klansman in Alabama, his mother, Balua Mae Donald, took the United Klans of America to court. And the unthinkable happened. She won. The jury awarded her a massive payout that came straight from the United Klans of the Americas pocket, which bankrupted them, and their organization would eventually collapse from the financial ruin. This was a landmark victory because it showed that the Klan could now be held liable if one of its rogue members went out and committed an act of, violence towards somebody in the name of the Ku Klux Klan. This is why today we don't see that many lynchings anymore. It's not because America just suddenly became nicer, but it's because the Klan can now be held financially responsible for crimes committed against black people. But hate movements, as we know, and as I've showed throughout this video, they rarely disappear, they just evolve. And eventually the Klan would find a new home, the internet. Now the conversations happened on message boards, anonymous communities, and public forums. The language changed from open white supremacy to white identity. Segregation became cultural preservation. Racial grievances became asking questions. The ideas adapted to the new environment. And because the language became more subtle, the movement became more harder to identify. Not impossible, just harder. People can now identify with white supremacist ideals and not even know that they're a white supremacist. Which brings us to the modern era, and this is where Matt Walsh enters the story. Now, before somebody starts screaming and yapping in the comments, let me be very clear. I'm not saying that Matt Walsh is a member of the KKK. I have absolutely no evidence of that. I'm not saying he attends meetings with the Christmas adventurers, though it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. What I'm saying is that ideas evolve. The rhetoric evolves. The Klan of the 1920s doesn't sound like the Klan of the 1960s. The Klan of the 1960s doesn't sound like the Klan of the 1980s when David Duke was in there. The extremists of today don't sound like the extremists of the past. There's much more to lose, and they can be held liable for things today. They also learned something. When you openly advocate for racism, segregation, and violence, people reject you. So the message has to change. Not necessarily the conclusion, but the message has to change. Instead of attacking the civil rights directly and saying it was a bad thing, you instead attack the people who fought for the civil rights. You see where I'm going? Instead of saying minorities don't belong, you frame them as beneficiaries to unfair advantages. The language becomes cleaner and the presentation becomes more respectable. The suit replaces the robe, or in Matt's case, the flannel. By the way, you like what I got on today? I was trying to tap into his little style that he always does. And that's what fascinates me about Matt Walsh. Not because I think he's plotting something in some underground bunker with the Christmas adventurers, but because so much of his content follows this exact pattern. Martin Luther King was imperfect. Rosa Parks wasn't just a tired old lady, and the protests were not always peaceful. Okay. And what do you want people to do with that information is my question. Because none of those facts make segregation right, or Jim Crow right, or voter suppression right. Yet the cumulative effect is to leave the viewer with a very specific impression. That maybe the civil rights movement wasn't as noble as we thought. That maybe its heroes weren't really heroes. That maybe America wasn't the villain after all. Because if your version of history spends hours criticizing the people who fought against injustice and very little time on the people who actually committed the injustice, then something weird is just happening here. Imagine making a documentary about World War II and just criticizing the Allied powers. Okay, but what about the Nazis? The same principle applies here. And I of course believe that history is complicated and it does deserve nuance. It always should challenge our assumptions. I believe that to my core. But challenging assumptions isn't the same thing as selectively applying skepticism to one side. And it doesn't matter what side you're on, right or left. And look, I'm not saying that everybody who's a Republican is racist, or that you can't have pride in where you came from or pride in your country. I mean, I love America. My ancestors were slaves here, and my forefathers gave their life in battle for this country. Even more recently, my grandfather fought in Vietnam, and my dad was part of the military. He was part of the Air Force, right? But loving something doesn't mean that you agree with everything that's happening. It doesn't mean you make excuses to exonerate white America from the past. And it also doesn't mean you use the past as an excuse to exonerate yourself in the present, like black people most of the time do. I know a lot of you are probably thinking to yourself, how could Matt Walsh be racist. And I want to remind you that racism doesn't make any fucking sense. It's retarded. So that's why you can have some people that are racist refer to Candace Owens as their friends, or be on Ben Shapiro's payroll, him being a Jewish man, is because it doesn't make any sense. Also, the Klan changes their ideas from time to time. Sometimes they're anti-Jew, sometimes they're anti-this or anti-that. Matt Walsh has expressed that he's Catholic, but that doesn't mean anything to me because racism's retarded and it doesn't make sense anyway. You hate people based on the idea that they're one thing, and it's just stupid, right? So obviously Matt Walsh is gonna deny that he's racist till he's blue in the face. Nobody who's racist would ever admit that they're actually racist. So this is just really hard to tell, and it makes it so complicated and tricky to try to talk about racism in today's age because it's just so tangled up in this web of, you know, minutia and bullshit, and I say one thing but I mean another thing, and this and that and this and that. Both sides feel like they're being attacked for their skin color, and it's so much. But I think that's it. That's the video. I appreciate you guys if you stuck around and watched this whole thing. It's going to be very long, but I sincerely appreciate you guys. This video is going to be demonetized. It just is. You know, the Daily Wire is petty. They don't want any of their footage used, but, you know, I don't really care. So, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, give it a thumbs up. I haven't said this in a while, but if you made it this far, I think that you're clinically insane and we need to have you committed, because there's no way that somebody would stay this long and watch me through if you're not an insane person. So think about getting yourself checked out, all right? I also want to put it out there. I am filming a short film this summer and it will be done next year. I can't wait for you guys to see that. If you guys are interested in seeing a short film, seeing me do something narrative, subscribe because you won't want to miss that video. I'm going to give the video out for free. I'm going to start making film content on YouTube every once in a while. So if you're interested in that, just subscribe and follow. Maybe hit the bell if you want to know when I have some more information about that stuff. But other than that, guys, that's going to be it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next video.